Hello and welcome to New Earth Awakening. Today we welcome Dr. Jeffrey Overall. He is a professor of conscious economics and entrepreneurship. His experience is on mental health, optimum performance, consciousness, expansion, sustainability, and entrepreneurial and organizational success and failure. He has been investigating the role of mental health in the workplace for over a dozen of years. He has nearly 50 publications, with 25 of these in peer-reviewed academic journals. He is the author of Capitalist Buddha, Waking Up to Conscious Economics. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be on your podcast.
Thank you, Jeff. You have a pretty amazing journey that you are still on. How did your journey and your path guide you to the work that you are doing today?
I think I've been serendipitously guided to the work that I've been doing just throughout my life. Like even before I've had peak spiritual experiences, like looking back afterwards, the philosophy that I was drawn to, like ancient Eastern practices, Western practices, and looking back, I was like, wow, that's been so helpful for me to go back into, Taoism that I learned in like my travels throughout the world and Buddhist communities and Hinduism communities and even Islamic communities, like just all the different spiritual practices and religions, just all serendipitously provided me with a foundation that helped me throughout my spiritual evolution. So that's been really, really profound. And the peak experiences that I had, although challenging, just guided me to do more research in them that just augmented what was already there as like a very firm foundation.
That's awesome. So, I get to know you a little bit because of a qualitative study that you made on Kundalini awakenings, but you are also an expert in leadership. Since my MBA was also in the field of leadership, it was about the effects of leadership on highly sensitive employees. We could start talking a little bit about that topic and then move slowly into the Kundalini. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, for sure. Let's do it.
Let's do it. So what I did was basically a quantitative approach to explore basically how different leadership behaviors affect the highly sensitive people, their well-being, not only on the workplace, but that it always goes also into the personal relationships that they have, their family. Stressors was also something that I looked into, because stress can also shorten your telomeres, and the telomeres are this part of the DNA that basically yeah, like secures that the DNA doesn't break, kind of. Because once these telomeres are no longer available, the DNA starts to break, and that's when we start basically decaying, or the body starts decaying, and then it goes into the transition that we know what I mean, right? So basically what I found was that positive behaviors, open communication, self-reflection, appreciation, yeah, those were increasing the well-being of the employees, right? And in contrast, the negative ones, it was undermining the quality of life and the well-being of these people, and I had a representative number of people, of HSPs, that took part in this quantitative study. The other sensitivity types were not representative, but could still see that the HSPs were actually less satisfied than the other groups, than the other sensitivity groups. And it was barely above average, which basically means that they weren't really satisfied nor dissatisfied. It was more of a meh situation, kind of, to put it that way. And at this point is where we find out that a highly sensitive individuals you have unique needs that might not be met so much, and this is also aligned with recently published research. I found this from November 2024, Honesty et al. It's about the interplay among environmental sensitivity, job stressors, and leadership styles on employee well-being. And they also said that supporting democratic leadership can help buffer stress. Um, and even then, highly sensitive individuals may remain more critical or discerning about leadership quality compared to their less sensitive peers. So, what is your experience? What were your findings? Because you also were one of the lead data analysts on a 3-year research project for the National Health Service in the United Kingdom. So please speak about your experiences on that.
Yeah, so it's really interesting around with what you're talking about. It reminds me of a recent study that I was involved with that was also a 3-year program that was more recent. It was during the pandemic, and we're trying to understand what were the barriers to leadership of young Black, Indigenous, person of color women in the labor force. And what we found out that half of them were experiencing burnout, and a third, like three-quarters of them were in a state of work-life imbalance. So there's like so much mental health that was occurring. Like in the workplace, we're in a mental health crisis. And when you're talking about leadership, like toxic leadership has a significant impact on employee well-being, resilience, all of these types of things. And it doesn't really matter what a person can do from, let's say, like a mind-body connection, biohacking perspective, or just like any type of wellness introduction. If they're in a place that's toxic, it doesn't really matter. You're just around that toxicity, and it's not gonna like you you might be able to brace yourself a little bit against what's happening compared to the next person that isn't maybe doing that. But at the end of the day, the impact of that toxicity, or just like your mental health being out of balance, is going to have such a significant impact on, yeah, like the quality of life, basically.
Yeah, something that I would really agree on. The only thing that changes is that you are not in a reactive place. If you are aware, let's say, or conscious, more conscious, you're not going to be reactive. You're going to be active. You're creating this. The question is, what is this showing you? Basically, what is the way to approach that? What is the way forward? But yeah, obviously, it's like you cannot ground enough then, right?
Yeah, and like, there's a lot coming out in, just basically the business community. Entrepreneurship is kind of leading the pack on this in relation to like consciousness expanding modalities or mindfulness practices, and how these can be used as tools to optimize performance and these types of things. But the reality is that when you're engaging with consciousness expanding practices, they have the possibility of unearthing what people have learned maybe throughout their life and their decades of how to ignore and suppress. And it just like basically brings out up from the subconscious to the conscious mind what's been ignored to the point where it can't be ignored or suppressed any longer. And people just go into an ontological crisis where their entire reality is shifted. And then they basically quit, leave their decade-long career, quit their jobs, like leave marriages, move halfway across the world and whatever, just blow their lives up because they just can't be in these circumstances or these scenarios anymore. And we saw that during the pandemic where, the great resignation where people are just like, I can't do this anymore. It's like killing me, literally, at least my spirit.
Yeah, exactly. Let's have a check here. Let's talk a little bit about the organizational culture and leadership, because I believe that is also a big one. It's like the organization sets the tone, basically, of what's going on. And then you have the people who are chosen to be in a leading position to fill that role, you know? So what is just your take on that? Is there a growing awareness coming up from your experience?
I think, yeah, from my experience, what's so important in these types of circumstances, and it really is aligned with both the employer, the organization, the people, the founders, whoever's behind the birth of the entity. And it's also aligned with, who's going to be part of that organization. And for me, what I've witnessed and what I teach to students is there has to be value alignment. Like you have to be aligned on the values. So if you're creating an organization and you have a set of values or a vision or whatever, you want to hire people that are aligned with your values and your vision. I mean, it might sound like common sense, but in practice, it often isn't. And then for an employee that is looking for a position, it's just make sure that you're aligned with whoever you're working for. And I know sometimes like where people are, they're like, I just need a job or whatever. But at the end of the day, like if there's value misalignment, it's not going to work. It'll eventually, run its course and end. Or if you are, at a point in your life where you were aligned with an organization and then whatever unfolds down your path and that is no longer aligned, then you probably need to find something that's in alignment with you. That's fundamentally like the starting point. Because if you don't have that, then it's just eventually not going to work out in the end.
Yeah, and I see that also as a matter of fact as coherent, being coherent or not being coherent, because it starts on a private kind of level of things, of going on with things. Like, for example, if your partnership or your friendships or whatever relationships are in your life are already not aligned in the values, then it's unlikely that other fields in your life may be aligned with your values, right? So that's the first place to look at, no? What are your values actually, no?
Yeah. And I think life does a really good job of clearing out and culling what just doesn't work and resonate anymore. It just makes it become so obvious, clear if you are attuned to what's presenting to you. It just becomes like unignorable. And what I mean, people can ignore it through all types of escapism for as long as they can, but it just becomes unbearable, at least for me. And then it's just, yeah, like life will just pull things away, clear things out, and get you on the path to where you need to be going.
Exactly. So, mm, I don't know if your research also went into sensitivity types and this kind of diversity that's going on, also neurodiversity.
No, I didn't touch too much on, let's say, I would call it like sensitivity or maybe empathic types of people. I think that's like a really interesting lens to look through of, let's say people that maybe register pretty high on an empathic questionnaire or scale or something to that effect and what occurs for them. in environments in the workplace. I think that's a really interesting thing to look at, but I haven't looked at specifically on that particular lens. Yeah,
Okay. But although you have practical steps for organizations and leaders that you could touch on, right?
for sure. Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, I think it's just, yeah, for leaders, I think they have to really do their work and focus internally on what it is that they're bringing into the workplace. Um, and they're guiding their staff and their employees in a way that is honorable, sustainable, um, and just really aligned. And I think regular communication with employees is vital just to understand where they are, what their goals are, what their values are, where they see themselves. Because a lot of times, a leader will just project on what they want out of their staff, and then they might just kind of put them in a particular limited scenario. So I think it's a really important place to be in a co-creative environment with staff and employees, and for them to just like understand what it is that they're carrying in their mind body connection.
Thank you. Yeah, that's also aligned with what I was writing, because, the highly sensitive people have been studies conducted that have declared them to be this canary in the coal mine type of people who will tell you about the level of well-being, let's put it that way, that's going on around them, or if there are any deeper issues in the workplace or wherever it is, right? So I also said, like, one of the things would be like, if you're aware that you have highly sensitive people on the team, you should be using this canary in the coal mine type of thing, It's like, let them express themselves, make a safe space where they know that they are not going to be judged for their perception on things, and let them explain. And then let that be maybe a foundation for self reflection for the leader and for the team members as well, And let's, like, leverage the strengths, use it, utilize it. And also, this self reflection is so important because that's how you look at what am I projecting, how the way that you said, like, and there have also been studies conducted. I don't know if you know them, like these studies where people have been studying that there were different groups, and some groups, the leader was going with this kind of way of seeing things, with this perception of the this group is great, the team is awesome, and you know what I mean. And in the other teams, the leader was like, nah, yeah, these people are like average, but somehow it works, and you know what I mean. And they were conducting like tests, and they realized that this looking into the possibility of these people being greater than life really catapulted those teams into greatness. And the other kind of perception made them really like wonky wonky, like the success was not available. They were measuring it with different kinds of things, success, how do you define it, but you get what I mean, right? So there's also this going on. Tell me.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really interesting, like, yeah, using the people around you and just harnessing what their skills are. And I think a big issue that occurs in leadership in general is that, you know, weak leaders will surround themselves with weak people because they feel threatened if there's anyone that may have some skills that are better than them, and like great leaders will surround themselves with people that are better than them, or at least they perceive that are better, so that they can just like augment them and improve their capabilities. And that's just, the reality of it is that, there's a lot of mediocrity that occurs. And yeah, they just kind of are drawn to other mediocre people, basically.
Yeah, I get it, Yeah, the ego is basically running the show on a very unconscious way then, those kind of
Oh, for sure.
situations then.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's your take on stress, Because it's like, in my opinion, the research has shown already. Well, that's why I started talking about the telomeres, right? Because nobody can fool the telomeres, you know what I mean? There is no tweaking about on that one. And if it's been proven that the telomere shortening occurs when the stress levels are heightened, then there is no way that there are people that can deal with stress better than others. There may be people who are just able to suppress it better, if you know what I mean. What is your take on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been my focus and I guess my perception of that is constantly evolving. And for me, it's stress is really just a function or an outcome of being in a state of fear. And it's just like when you're in a state of fear, the body is producing a response. Like we have a reptilian brain basically that is constantly, or at least has the capacity to be constantly looking for threats. And, for a lot of us, at least in, I would call it like a Western industrialized context, there's not a whole lot that is gonna, like, there's not really a tiger that's gonna be coming around, the city corner. So for us to have that hyper cortisol response to those threats isn't happening anymore, but there's still the searching for things that potentially can threaten, and it comes in different forms now. It's like, is it the email that's going to come and give me bad news or whatever? So the conceptual mind has created, or and this is like our society, at least that I've witnessed, is conducive to this, where there's constantly a focus on the future, and there's often a projection of what may occur in the future, and that is often of maybe a negative state, or catastrophizing is a word that's used sometimes in therapy and psychology, where it's just like people are creating these fictional experiences of something that they're creating that they need to be fearful of, and as a result of that, they're just producing stress unnecessarily, and that, deteriorates health. Like the data is available to show, like stress kills basically. And yeah, like there's nothing really more to say other than that it kills people basically. And it's kind of coming back into, yeah, like simplifying it, are you going to choose to be living in a state of fear and calling that into your space and in your environment and incubating that? Or are you going to choose love, or anything else that kind of moves away from fear, maybe neutrality or whatever? Because, like, it's a spectrum. On one end, it's fear, on the other end, it's love. And some people can't just, go from one all the way to the other side. There's like kind of like, let's move the needle a little bit so I'm not in a perpetual state of fear. But at least like I'm neutral or whatever, and then kind of moving towards a state of love, acceptance, and yeah.
Exactly. So first is going into neutrality, usually the task, and then above it, right? Unless you have a Kundalini awakening, because then everything just pops up open and you are at the other end of the spectrum, just in one to three,
Yeah,
right?
you can be for sure.
So I think this is perfect for us not to start talking about Kundalini. So please tell us your story with that.
Yeah, so I had a spontaneous Kundalini arising that really came completely out of nowhere. I wasn't engaged in any spiritual practice or consciousness expanding practice at that particular point. Like I had learned to meditate from some Tibetans 10 years before, and I meditated for 5 years, and then I kind of just got busy and didn't focus any attention on it. And yeah, I just had this spontaneous Kundalini arising, and it lasted for 8 days. It was extremely destabilizing. I had absolutely no idea what was happening to me, what was occurring. Like, it made me very sick. I was hospitalized as a result of it. And it took me quite a while to integrate and study and research and find out what it was that I had experienced and what the data was and what other people had experienced. So that really just pushed me into doing a lot of study. Like I traveled the world, I worked with so many different practitioners, just trying to evolve my practice. And well, I didn't even just start a practice really because like I just had nothing. So like I just was plugged into what's called the God socket, and my system was fried, and then I just had to, learn what it was that occurred. Grateful for being an academic and being able to at least learn how to do my own independent study of that, as opposed to just, there was a lot of seeking, but there was both internal and kind of external at the same time.
Wow. So, yeah, you also had a qualitative study that you did yourself on Kundalini awakenings, integration, the challenges that come with it. Please talk about that a little bit as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I looked at a couple of different things. This was a study that I conducted with a community of people that declared to have gone through a Kundalini rising. And some of the aspects that I looked at were around dark night of the soul, spiritual practice, if there was a community that they were involved with, what type of confusion that they had. And what I had discovered is that there was a lot of challenges that emerged, at least within the context of confusion, was if because sometimes if people have a Kundalini rising, that often is a result of trying to, at least from my experience, of just shedding what is no longer aligned or what no longer serves the particular person. And through that process, it can stimulate a dark night of the soul. And if it's an extremely intense one, that leads to confusion for sure. And especially if there's like this destabilization of, there was a life that was being lived prior to this major peak experience, and then how to, and an ontological crisis occurs often in those experiences where someone's reality completely shifts. They might have lived an entire life up until that point where up was up and down was down, but during and afterwards, like down became up and up became down. And it's like, how do you integrate that into your normal reality, day-to-day experience? So those two aspects, like intense dark night of the soul and really a challenging time of integrating into normal life, lead to heightened sense of confusion. And if there's a lack of spiritual practice, it makes it even worse. So
Yeah, so let's talk about the spiritual practice because those are called coping mechanisms, basically. That's how I called it in my thesis. And I talked about awareness, I talked about meditation, which are basically the usual ones, let's put it that way.
mhm.
But those are just actually activation tools or intentional triggers, however you want to put that. How do you define coping mechanisms for yourself, and which ones are the ones that best for you in your own experience right now?
Yeah, for me, I find that grounding in nature is a really powerful practice for sure. And it's also really important to mention is that, if somebody's having a real peak activation state, some of these practices can make it worse. Like if somebody's like in an ungrounded, like a real peak experience, like a Kundalini rising or whatever, and then they're gonna go and like sit in meditation, like that can just like make it worse, even, or just being in like nature or whatever. Like sometimes it all depends on, like, eating food, like grounding, doing stuff like that, or like spending time in community could be helpful too. So it's just some of these practices people need to be just aware of that they can be activators. They're gonna also like they're a paradox, right? Like they can activate and they can also ground you and stabilize you and calm you and whatever. So it's just sometimes it could be one or the other, and it also depends on what the experience that somebody is having for sure. And at least, yeah, from that Kundalini study that I did, there were some challenges around community. It's like community like is so important for support and these types of things, but there's a paradox of that as well, where it could be if it's a rigid community and confusion can arise from that. So it's really important to be, in community and also being taking some time to be isolated and being in your own space, in your own, yeah, environment, and seeing what resonates for you somatically within your body.
I love how you said all of that because you put already the non duality aspect into it, which is basically that both extremes, let's call it that, or both ends of the line can be truth at the very same time. It's an and situation, not a whether or not or. That is usually the dualistic kind of viewing things. It's an and situation, right? And also, you spoke about community, and this ties into a little bit what you said before about leadership, that if the community you are in a workplace with is everywhere, it's toxic, then obviously it's going to be, if you had a Kundalini awakening, maybe more destabilizing than stabilizing, right? Possible.
Yeah, and I think that for a lot of these experiences is people might not be aware that they are even in a toxic environment, because it just sometimes it evolves into a toxic space over time, and it's just like that frog in a, boiling water. At least that's a saying that we have in our culture. It's just like you don't know until you're in it for too long and you're like, "Oh wow, yeah, this is toxic." And there's an awakening moment where there's an awareness that comes and there's a realization where it's just like, and sometimes, life has a great way of making those obvious to us, or at least in my case it has, where it maybe wasn't known before. And it just becomes abundantly clear. And it's just like, okay, wow, this is like a toxic place and I need to, move out of it. Or maybe it's not toxic, it's just not aligned anymore. And it's just, you know, it's time to evolve. And there's, something else that may not be readily present, but is going to shift me into a direction that is going to be more aligned.
Yeah, alignment over attachment. That's how I put it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit definitions from your point of view. What is a healthy community? How would you describe it in your own words?
Yeah, I think non-judgmental is really important. I would say embodying critical thinking, being open to question like at least internally within themselves, question their beliefs, where there's not this like rigid, it's this and this is the only way, because then you're getting into kind of a dogmatic space. So non-judgmental, critical thinking, critique, debate, these types of things are really healthy to embody, and being open-minded, aware. Yeah, I think those are kind of like the main pillars that are standing out for me in this particular moment. Yeah.
I love that you said rigidity because for me that's also fear based. Because if you are rigid about something, it's because you are afraid and you need to hold on tight to whatever it is because otherwise it will slip and then whatever, it's like that's fear in my eyes, kind of.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely in that bucket of fear. So that's, and just like, empathetic and just loving, caring, kindness, like those are the essentials for me. Like it goes without saying, and that's why I didn't mention them before. It's just like, yeah, there's that heart centered, heart open space where people are willing to kind of look within themselves, and as opposed to like projecting outward into other people's space, and just be willing to, yeah, look really deep in the mirror within themselves and kind of navigate from there is essential for any type of community. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, this ties always into shadow work, as I see it. Like you can do the shadow work with your partner, with your friend, with whomever is mirroring something with you. You can have an open communication where both are being vulnerable, both are sharing their perceptions, point of views. And it's like this radical, well, that's how I do it, at least in my personal relationships. It's like this real raw honesty, kind of. It's like, no, this will sound maybe a little bit not so cool. Could be possible. I'm just putting it out there, But this is the way I see things. And this is the way it works for me. And this is the way that it does not so much work for me. So let's see. We are in alignment with each other and let's talk it out. You know what I mean? And this is something that's missing a little bit sometimes in on a global level. I don't know how to say it better.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's, yeah, doing that shadow work is important, and I also recognize that it comes out. I think maybe more so, if we look at, different aspects of society, it might just be all shadow that's presenting, and then in other cases it's not. And I think it's just like Jung said, it's just, when Freud said this as well, it was along the lines of, whatever's suppressed or pushed down will eventually find its way to come out. So you can stay on top of it, and or not, and it'll eventually come out. And people might be arguing about the toothpaste cap wasn't put back on, and it's like, okay, well, you're not that's not the issue here. Like, what's really underneath that's causing this overreaction to something that's seemingly like innocuous, basically. And it's just like, okay, and people might not know, like they might not be aware of what is causing these particular things. So I think taking that step first, like, like look, be actively wanting to do that shadow work, and giving space for it and giving time for it to look inside, so it's not being like, it'll be mirrored back to you or whatever, and or it'll be projected back out if people aren't willing to look at it or whatever, but it'll eventually come forward. It does, like, that's just the natural law. And if, however people want to navigate that, it'll all come out in the end, so it's perfect as it is. So, I mean, for me, like, I don't know if Like, I just don't really know. Like, is society in a place of not looking at their shadow? I don't really know. I mean, I kind of just have to see what's coming into my space or my environment, and it's just okay. If I'm seeing that there's people around me that are actively looking at that stuff, then I guess, that's the spaces that I'm frequenting in at this particular point. So for me, I would say reality appears to be doing their shadow work.
Perfect. I love that very much. That's the spirit. So let's talk a little bit about definitions. What is the definition of the dark night of the soul? And obviously, on the other side of that, what is your personal definition of integration?
Yeah. So for the dark night of the soul, I kind of like root it back to the origination of it with, Saint John of the Cross, who was the one who coined the phrase. But like, I just did some research on this recently based on my own navigation of dark night of the soul experiences. And for me, what it really is it's a transformation. It's a reorganization. And through that transformation and reorganization, life has the potential to completely shift and transform. Whereas the conceptual mind, the ego, whatever you want to call it, may have become really comfortable with a particular way of being. It liked where it lived, it liked the people that it was in relationship with and its community, and it liked its career and all of these types of things. And then in a dark night of the soul, those can just be completely transformed. And then you can be in this liminal state where everything is kind of upside down and fluxed and perceived chaos. And I think for me, what the biggest aspect of the dark night of the soul is the faith. And it's really that keeping the faith, and it's a test of faith. Because, it's really easy to be in a place of faith when everything's going great and everything's awesome. Of course, like, yeah, I have faith. This is brilliant. However, if you're in the middle of the ocean and you don't see any land anywhere around, and the only thing you have to hold on to is your faith, then, there's the possibility of just losing the faith. And in my experiences of a dark night, it wasn't long. I had a real divine intervention where the invisible hand of grace alerted me to the importance of keeping faith in a dark night of the soul. And it's just like that faith is really important to maintain. It's like that trusting that, we are being guided to the right space for us, basically. And that's kind of what the dark night of the soul for me is really all about. And I was on a panel just over a year ago at a conference, and one of the topics that came around was on the dark night of the soul. And somebody had said it's a blessing to have one of those in your life. It might not feel like it in the moment, but it truly is. To have that divine reorganization and transformation to get you onto the right path, as opposed to just, like, we have these boundaries around us, and there's like this electric fence that's present. And people might, like me in my past, where I've just been like running and smashing right up against that electric fence and just keep going. And it's like, okay, like if you're going in the wrong direction and you're going to wreck your life as a result of that, it's beautiful to have an intervention where you're like, okay, now you need to be going in this direction. And it might be painful and uncomfortable for a little while, but it's going to get you to a better place, as opposed to just like constantly running into the end of the electric fence in the complete opposite direction of where you need to be going.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, it's like a blessing, and you will find out eventually at some stage, maybe years later, for some of us. And it's like new layers will be also relieved, um, or new layers will be shown to you at some stage, right? So, yeah, exactly. And what is your definition of integration? Integration, let's say higher vibrational frequencies. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think integration is sometimes can be overlooked. At least that's what I experienced in my journey. I understand the value of integration now as opposed to experiences in my, call it more of a seeking state of looking for like a peak experience and constantly seeking a peak experience and then just basically going from experience to experience to experience without any integration or stabilization of that. And I recognize that that wasn't conducive or healthy for me to do. So it's just, you know, integrate a little bit. And I heard somebody say, I don't know, about a year and a half ago, it's good to do a little digging and then integrate. Don't dig and dig and keep going because you're like, you'll just keep finding stuff. So it's like, yeah, dig a little bit, integrate. What is that feeling? What does that occur? Be in communication with community, counseling support, whatever the support network looks like, and spend that time to integrate and, really feel into what that experience was.
Yeah. So my definition of integration is basically embodiment. Which what does it mean? Well, that means that if I know that you are another me from another point of view, I'm gonna treat you as such. I'm gonna look at your light, right? I'm gonna namaste you. Basically, I see your light, right? And it's basically this kind of deep respect for your journey where you're standing at. So if I want to integrate, I need to embody that, and I need to not only acknowledge, but maybe have even reverence for both of our experiences at the same time. If we agree, nice, cool, and dandy. If we don't, also, again, the same reverence for each one experience. Would you agree or elaborate on that from your point of view?
Yeah, I think the embodiment part is really important. And I think it's kind of just like aligning it through the mind body structure. We can feel it in the body. And then there's an aspect of, integrating it through the conceptual mind, through all of our different subtle bodies that we have access to. And it's just spending that. So there's, yeah, the embodiment. And I think there's a temporal aspect of it that's important, where it's just there's time for that to land and to sit and to percolate and to become a sense of normality. And there's a period of time that is required through that particular process. And there's various tools that could be used for that embodiment, that temporal aspect of it. And yeah,
So I love that you said normalization because it's like you can normalize behaviors that are life affirming and you can normalize behaviors that are life negating. That's how I say that. What are those tools for as of that you have been talking about for embodiment, like to normalize
y-
that?
yeah, I think somatic work is really helpful, like doing some, just sitting and feeling how things land in the body is really powerful. Journaling, just writing, there's like an aspect and activation that occurs through the subconscious of actually writing out what the experience is or was. So journaling, vocalizing that, communicating that, having it witnessed is really powerful, being witnessed either by yourself or through another person is are really powerful ways to integrate.
I love that. Thank you. So, now I would like to ask you if you have some tool that you want to share with the audience for them to go practice themselves.
Yeah, I think what's been really powerful for me over the past couple of years is self-inquiry, and it's really trying to understand, the ego, the conceptual mind, and who is behind that. Like, who is the one that was always there? And it's just like, who am I? Just ask that. Who am I? Other than, of course, I'm this person or that person or whatever. And it's like, no, like, who really is that? And really looking for who's the one that's there and always has been there. So self-inquiry is a really, really powerful tool that's come across my life, and I definitely it's an ancient, practice in Zen, and it's been iterated on over the past few decades, and it's a really powerful way to kind of clear what's in the subconscious. And it helps people to just be able to discern between the ego self-structured and what is that awareness that's always present.
Exactly. Thank you very much for that one. Yeah, who am I beyond this personality that I'm having in this current experience or any other personality that I've ever had?
Yeah, exactly, for sure.
So another question would be like, how do you see this shadow work? Because you said it's everywhere. It's in the awareness is in the field. Um, so, because I see that also as something that can be very, very normalized if you choose to normalize it, right? That can be something that is just like sitting somewhere and something pops up in the field that is not of the preference, let's put it that way. And then it's like this inquiry of why is this showing up in the field right now? Like, is this maybe showing me something that is still inside of me in some kind of way, shape, or form that maybe a deeper layer needs to be uncovered? Or am I maybe judging this in some kind of way? So it's going into this non judgmental kind of way. Or it could be also giving you another message. Yeah, the message could be like, step into your power, you know? So this kind of thing is something that I tend to normalize in my everyday life, and with the people closest to me. So how do you approach this?
Yeah, I think for me, it's setting the space for that to occur, like in within myself, like create a safe space where I can explore what's coming up for me, where I can have time where I'm not just, doing the stuff on the fly, where I'm not doing it properly. So I might, like for example, last year, I did a retreat that ended up, it was a 6-day retreat, and it ended up being a very shadow work experience for me where I just like had a lot of shadow that was coming up. And that was great. I had the space, I created the space, the environment, the context for me to explore those. And then, through my practice is that I'm in regular interactions where I'm engaging with other people that where I can be witnessed or I can look deeper at what's present for me, that I can understand and integrate and go deeper into and have space to do that. And I also think it's really important to do that in relationships where this is, expressed in advance, where that is an expectation. where, in friendships or relationships where it's like, okay, let's create a space where we can navigate these challenges that are inevitably, well, I don't want to say inevitably, they might not, depending on what the circumstance or what the experience is. And if they do happen to arise, then, there's a space that's created to be able to navigate those and understand them, alchemize them, and heal and bring them to light, basically.
Exactly. So, what is your personal definition of healing then? This context.
I would say it's awareness and an integration of it.
I
Like
love
there's like,
that.
there's a lot of different ways I think at looking at healing, and sometimes depending on it, if there's something that has like a really big charge and this was some deep, you know, trauma or wound or whatever, that might take a little bit more to kind of integrate or transcend or bring awareness to. But for something that isn't that significant, there might just be, like, wow, I'm aware of that. Okay, I see that, I understand that, I'm gonna integrate that. So it doesn't necessarily need to be like, a big ritual around it. Like I need to like stand on my left foot and spin around 3 times for it to be transmuted. Like it can just be awareness. I'm like, oh, okay, like I'm clearing that out now.
I love how you said that. And it's like, like spirituality sometimes could be perceived as this kind of rituals that you do to transmute or to whatever it is, right? But as I previously said, for me those are just coping mechanisms kind of as well, like activation tools that allow us to say, I am transmuting XYZ, right? But at the end of the day, you are the creator, you're the one who is transmuting it. So it doesn't matter if you hop on the right foot or on the left foot. At the end of the day, it's you who is just choosing to transmute it. And this choice is basically Christ awareness or Christ consciousness. So that is the transmutation, right?
Yeah, and I think it just kind of comes back to that self-inquiry. It's like, who's the one that's healing right now? Like, and whatever the answer for that person, it's like, okay, who's the one that needs healing? So, and that's just an invitation for somebody to look at that, like, and whatever archetype is present that needs something, basically.
Yeah, thank you. This has been really an enlightening conversation. So, the last question would be your highest vision for the new earth.
Yeah, I would say that people embody love, choose love. Yeah, awareness, and just be present in the moment. And because that's really it. Present is all we have and all we've ever had. Um, and I think it's just as simple as that. Just choose love. And that's a choice that is always present. We always have a choice. And I think it's that and sovereignty, respecting our individual and collective sovereignty. So that's the vision that I have. And if everyone's choosing love and is present, that's the reality that I want to be engaged with, for sure.
Thank you. That's an awesome answer. So, Jeff, I will be posting your links below in the description box for people to find out more about you and the work that you're doing. But maybe you can explain a little bit of your counseling as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I have a website. It's drjeffreyoverall.com. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn under at Dr. Jeffrey Overall. I have a book that's available on Amazon. It's called Capitalist Buddha, waking up to conscious economics, and I'm doing a lot of research at the moment around consciousness expanding modalities and what the impact of those are on careers and workplaces and entrepreneurship. And then I also look at, how those impact other areas of life. So mental health, um, you know, psychology, some of the work ties into and makes contributions there. And I'm also open to working with entrepreneurs and organizations that are looking to integrate some of these tools into their organizations and their lives.
So, thank you very much, Jeff, for the work that you are doing and for being a guest on your Earth Awakening.
Thank you. Thank you for this platform that you've created and for giving me the opportunity to speak to your audience. I'm grateful for you and the amazing work that you're doing and grateful for this opportunity. So thank you very much for the space.